Anthony Garcia, an ambitious young man, decided to marry a wealthy elderly woman, hoping to take advantage of her fortune and scam her. However, he was not prepared for the wisdom and cunning that this lady possessed, and did not believe in the life lesson that she taught him. At 25 years old, Anthony had a deep aversion to conventional work. Raised in the warmth of his aunt and uncle, who always protected him from the hardships of life, Anthony never knew the true value of hard work and dedication. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and his aunt and uncle, noticing his complacent attitude, decided it was time for him to make his own way. Reluctantly, Anthony got a job at a local bakery, but his behavior was notorious. He was often late and treated customers with disdain. Deep down, he longed for a life of luxury, with designer clothes and parties in exclusive locations. However, his modest salary did not allow for such extravagances. And although he was a handsome man, he rarely found anyone willing to support his lifestyle. Anthony's routine was predictable, from home to work to work to home. But that all changed one sunny afternoon when a distinguished customer walked into the bakery. A luxury car pulled up in front of the establishment, and a chauffeur opened the door for Susan, an elegant lady with silver hair and an imposing posture. Anthony, who rarely looked up at customers, was immediately drawn to her aura of wealth and power. With a sudden shift in his posture, he greeted her with a genuine smile and impeccable service, something rare in his working days. Susan, noticing the young man's politeness, smiled back, charmed by his energy. "Good afternoon, madam. How may I serve you today?" he asked with unexpected charm. Susan ordered a simple coffee for herself and a tea for her driver. Anthony, in an unprecedented gesture, prepared the orders himself, ensuring that everything was perfect. When he delivered the drinks, he couldn't resist giving a subtle compliment, making Susan smile. When he saw an opportunity, Anthony didn't hesitate to introduce himself and express his desire to work for her, claiming that he felt underutilized in his current position. Without hesitation, he said, "I can see that you are a woman of great influence. Could you give me a chance at your company? I feel like I am wasting my potential here." Susan, surprised by the young man's audacity, pondered for a moment. She then took a card from her purse and handed it to Anthony. The card had her name and a phone number on it. Anthony, excited, thanked her, feeling that his luck was changing. The next morning, he called the number. "I asked Mrs. Susan how I can help you," a female voice replied. Anthony explained his situation and, to his surprise, the secretary said she had been expecting his call. An interview was scheduled for the following day. Since he did not have any suitable clothing for the occasion, he decided to rent a fancy suit to attend the interview, in an attempt to hide his true identity. Anthony arrived early, eager for the interview. Susan, impressed by his determination, decided to conduct the interview herself, as she wanted to get to know him better. She was not usually the one to conduct interviews, but the young man was so charismatic that she decided to make an exception. As they talked, Susan was enchanted by the young man, not because of his beauty and charm, but because of his way of communicating and his desire to progress in life. In addition, Susan noticed his polite and gentlemanly manner with everyone around him, which made her even more enchanted by the young man. Due to his communication skills and charisma, Anthony passed all stages of the selection process, being hired for the sales department and being responsible for negotiating with large companies. Susan was the owner of one of the largest electronics equipment chains in the country. She took over the business after the death of her husband, the company's founder. Against all odds, she turned the company into an empire. On her first day at work, Susan showed Anthony around the office and her co-workers, explaining to him a little about the history of the company and how it had been founded by her late husband. The story excited Anthony immensely. Realizing that Susan was a lonely lady, he saw a great opportunity to seduce her and inherit her great fortune. With dedication, Anthony soon began to stand out. His charm and eloquence were undeniable, and he had a natural ability to persuade and close deals. In just a few months, he managed to secure hundreds of clients for the company, further attracting Susan's attention. However, despite his professional success, Anthony still had his most audacious plan, waiting for the right moment to act, to win Susan's heart and, consequently, her fortune. Without imagining what was going on behind the young man's gentle smile and kind attitude, Susan invited him to dinner at a sophisticated restaurant, with the intention of showing her gratitude for his good work and collaboration with the company. During dinner, Anthony used all his charm, using psychological and persuasion techniques to seduce Susan. Charmed, she returned his flirtations, letting slip how handsome and seductive she found him. After a few weeks, not wanting to waste any more time, Anthony decided to take a chance and asked Susan to be his girlfriend. At first she burst out laughing, thinking he was joking, but Anthony, holding her hand, said he had never been so serious in his entire life. Feeling Anthony's soft hands and the warmth of his body now so close, a nervousness ran through Susan. Anthony, besides being charming, was polite and a gentleman, but Susan hesitated, citing the age difference and the professional relationship between them. However, Anthony's charm and charisma were undeniable, and he managed to get Susan to accept his proposal. Phrases like, "Despite your age, you are extremely charming. How can such a fascinating woman be alone?" And, "There is no reason to care about age. Where there is chemistry, there is overcoming any difference," Anthony would say, making Susan fall for his illusory talk. Susan was surprised that a young man like Anthony would be interested in a woman his own age. However, the heat of the moment prevented her from reflecting more deeply on this. Anthony knew that the most delicate phase of his plan was about to begin. He devoted himself to the relationship, showing Susan places she had never imagined visiting. Furthermore, he made her feel unique and special. With Anthony's affection and attention, it didn't take long for her to fall deeply in love with him. Susan felt rejuvenated by Anthony's side, experiencing new things and rediscovering the joy of life. Her late husband, although always present, was not the most attentive. He chose not to have children, which made Susan feel even more lonely after his death, dedicating herself exclusively to her business. Shortly after, in an unexpected gesture, Susan rented the most luxurious penthouse in the city for a weekend with Anthony. He was surprised to be taken to the hotel by helicopter, a completely new experience for him. On the hotel balcony, Susan made the most surprising proposal. She asked Anthony to marry her. He, hiding his surprise, quickly accepted, leaving Susan thrilled. However, a small interaction between Anthony and a hotel employee made Susan question her future husband's character. Furthermore, she had not yet realized how much Anthony was spending of his fortune, buying designer clothes, gold watches, and other luxuries. But after Susan's bank manager noticed some unusual transactions, he decided to call to check. It was at that moment that the elderly woman became aware of Anthony's exorbitant spending, causing the illusory veil that obscured her vision of the truth to immediately fade, and she began to suspect that Anthony's interest lay solely in her fortune. Susan, despite her wealth, had always been modest in her spending. She had grown up in a humble village and worked hard to help support her family while her husband tried to establish the business. When the company finally prospered, she became the majority shareholder and, after her husband's death, the sole owner. With a sense of unease gnawing at her and fearing that she had been deceived all these months, Susan decided to hire a private investigator. The professional followed her fiancé for weeks, meticulously recording his steps. When Susan received the final report, she could hardly believe her eyes. Anthony, due to his competence, had been promoted and transferred to another unit of the company months earlier, with the responsibility of supervising other managers. However, he had not shown up for work for weeks. Although he left home every day claiming he was going to work, in reality he was seeing another woman and regularly going to parties and restaurants. In short, he was constantly cheating on Susan and, on top of that, using his fortune and company card to pamper his mistress with extravagant gifts. The pain of betrayal ate away at her insides and Susan was devastated. All her trust had been shattered. Her attempt to experience a new love again had been a disaster and she felt bolder and more deceived than she had ever felt in her entire life. How could he do this to me? Tell me he loved me one moment and then go out and cheat on me like a younger woman the next. She thought to herself, reflecting on how naive she had been and how blinded she had been by the passion and illusion of a handsome young man. Despite her deep sadness, she was determined to move on. However, feeling betrayed and manipulated, she was determined not to let Anthony get away with it. Susan immediately began planning a way to retaliate and get even with the manipulative and dishonest young man. Her first move was to immediately block all of Anthony's credit cards and remove him from her company's payroll, but without warning him. After that, when Anthony first tried to pay for dinner with his lover using the card, he was surprised by the refusal. Disconcerted, he tried to downplay the situation, claiming it was a common operator error or machine failure, shifting the blame to the attendant and offering another card. After 3 failed attempts, the atmosphere became tense and uncomfortable. Anthony spoke angrily to the kind waiter. The waiter apologized and promised to return shortly. When he returned, he was accompanied by the manager, who asked Anthony if he had any cash, since his cards were acting up. Desperate, Anthony tried to contact Susan several times, but she purposely did not answer any of his calls, leaving him completely helpless. The restaurant manager said that he could not help him any further in this case and that if he did not pay, he would have to call the police. Faced with the possibility of police involvement and a night in detention, he handed over his documents and cell phone to the manager, promising to return the next day to pay off the debt. In order to avoid further discomfort in the crowded establishment, the manager agreed. Anthony was furious. Although confused by what had happened, in his mind everything was still going according to plan. He decided to deal with the situation in the best way possible, in an attempt to avoid causing disagreements with Susan. When he returned home, the first thing he did was confront the elderly woman. Trying to hide his irritation, Anthony questioned her about the incident and the missed calls. Susan pretended not to understand, claiming not to know the reason, suggesting that it could be a possible banking error, assuring her that she would resolve the issue with the bank the following morning. The young man tried to remain calm, but his frustration was evident. It was at that moment that Susan saw the real Anthony for who he was, without the veil of glamour she had cast over him. She saw through his true intentions and was even more determined not to let his lies and betrayals go unpunished. The next morning, Susan did indeed go to the bank, but not to settle her credit card issue, but to change her marriage contract and her inheritance. Without children and with her family no longer present, everyone always wondered what would happen to that money and all of the woman's business dealings, which were now kept secret between her, her lawyer, and her bank manager. A week later, unfortunately, the elderly woman passed away abruptly, with a heavy heart due to feeling betrayed by the last person to whom she had dedicated her genuine feelings. What many did not know was that, in silence, Susan was fighting cancer. Aware that her days were limited, she wrote a letter before leaving, entrusting it to her loyal driver. In it, she expressed her last words and made a special request. With her death, the fate of her inheritance became a great mystery. After Susan's death, Anthony adopted the demeanor of a grieving widower. He dressed in an expensive black suit and wore sunglasses so that no one could see the lack of tears in his eyes. During the wake, the will was read. The room was packed with employees and shareholders concerned about the future of the company. The document began with Susan thanking everyone for coming and expressing her hope that she would finally find true happiness by reuniting with her late husband in another dimension and being together forever. This moment created a palpable discomfort for Anthony as everyone stared at him. As for the company, it would be divided equally among all the shareholders. According to Susan, they had done a good job over the years, directly contributing to the growth of the institution. Regarding her fortune, it was discovered that the amount the elderly woman had in her account exceeded all expectations. Contrary to the perception of many about her supposed naivety, she proved to be a shrewd investor over the years, making impressive profits from the shares and sales of companies she helped found. However, all of this wealth was to be used to found an NGO dedicated to sheltering homeless children. This organization would not only provide shelter, food, and clothing until they were 18 years old, but would also ensure that these children would graduate from renowned universities and secure a position in one of her companies. Anthony's expression of rage and fury was etched on his face as the reading progressed. Frustrated at not inheriting either the company or the fortune, Anthony anxiously awaited the fate of the properties and vehicles, whose total value exceeded what he could spend in his entire life. However, to his dismay, all of these assets would be sold and the proceeds given to established charities. When the will finally referred to Anthony, it began with a profound expression of gratitude. The late Susan highlighted his importance in her final years, stating that because of him, she had lived extraordinary and unique moments, discovered stunning places, and connected with realities and people she had never imagined existed. For all of this, she expressed her sincere gratitude. Susan mentioned that she believed she had also brought the young man much happiness, and so she had reserved for him one of the most meaningful gifts she could give. Anthony was given a key that, according to the will, would open a safe deposit box in the most prestigious bank in the country. A sly smile appeared on Anthony's face, possibly anticipating a collection of jewelry or property deeds. Everyone applauded in memory of Susan, assuming that Anthony had probably inherited the most valuable part of her fortune. The wake had barely ended when Anthony, without wasting any time, went straight to the bank, curious to check on his long-awaited inheritance. Upon arriving at the bank, Anthony was warmly welcomed by the bank manager, who mentioned that everyone was waiting for him. He was taken to the vault, located on the most secure floor of the building. For privacy reasons, the staff left Anthony alone, asking him to let them know when he was ready to leave. Overcome with anxiety, he quickly opened the sturdy vault, expecting to find diamonds and other valuables. However, what he saw inside made the young man almost fall over backwards. Inside the safe was a cup of espresso, identical to the one Anthony had served Mrs. Susan the day they first met. The drink, now cold, was accompanied by a simple note. Immediately, the young man got the message and understood the meaning. She was aware of his intentions. The coffee cup had been left as a mockery for Anthony. It was Susan's way of responding to all the young man's betrayals and lies, which culminated in nothing more than deep disappointment and bitter coffee. The young man could not believe it. He was stunned, realizing that, in the end, he was exactly where he had started, with no money and no job. He was furious. Between tears and screams, he felt lost, aware that his farce had been unmasked. His reputation in the city was tarnished after the scandal, and he never again achieved the social status he so desired. Even the coffee shop where he had previously worked refused to rehire him. Susan, on the other hand, left in peace, knowing that she had served justice, and that her fortune was now destined to do good, free from deceitful and treacherous hands. Thanks for watching. Comment below what you thought of this story, and which city you are watching us from. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel, so that together we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories. See you soon.